The blizzard was a white wall, swallowing the highway whole. Her headlights barely cut through it when she saw him. An old man, stranded beside his dead car, just a dark shape fading into the storm. She pulled over, knowing that in this cold, stopping could mean risking her own life. She had no idea his phone call, made minutes later, would summon an entire military convoy to her doorstep. Her name is Maya, a graphic designer just trying to get home before the state police closed the roads. The man she saved was General James McAllister, a legend who commanded entire divisions. But why would a retired general, with all his resources, need her help? And what does gratitude look like when it comes from the highest levels of power? This is where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. Maya's life until that moment was measured in deadlines and commutes. She worked for a small firm, lived in a rented bungalow, and her biggest concern that Tuesday was beating the storm home. The forecast had said 3 inches. They were wrong. It became a historic whiteout with wind chills plunging to 30 below zero. Highways turned into skating rinks. And that's when General James Iron Jaw McAllister's aging sedan, against the advice of his entire staff, chose to give out. He was 82 years old, a widower, a man who had planned amphibious landings and negotiated ceasefires, now utterly stranded on Interstate 94 because he'd insisted on driving himself to a veterans hospital visit. His security detail was a 45-minute drive away, gridlocked. His cell phone battery was dying, and the snow was piling up against his driver's side door. This is where their worlds collided. Maya's beat-up SUV fishtailed as she passed him. She saw the hazard lights, a faint blink in the swirl. She saw the shape of a person inside. Every instinct told her to keep going. The news was telling people to stay off the roads, to not stop. But a deeper one made her brake. She reversed back, a dangerous maneuver in near-zero visibility, and pulled up ahead of him. What she found was a man who defied her expectations. He wasn't panicked. He was calm, apologizing for the inconvenience as if he'd spilled a drink, not stranded himself in a life-threatening situation. His clothes were simple, an old wool coat, a flat cap, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She offered him a ride to the next exit, to warmth. He accepted with the graciousness of someone used to both command and courtesy. Inside her car, he made a single call on her phone, not to a tow truck, to a number he knew by heart. His side of the conversation was brief. "David, it's Jim, I'm fine. A young lady named Maya has me. Coordinates are yes. No lights, no sirens, understood." He hung up and thanked her again. He asked about her life with a genuine interest that felt rare. He noticed her half-finished coffee, the sketchbook on the backseat, the exhaustion in her voice from a long work week. Maya dropped him at a small diner at the next exit where a flustered young man in a military sweater was waiting, practically vibrating with anxiety. The general shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Maya. This debt won't be forgotten." He tried to hand her a folded $100 bill from his wallet. She refused, gently closing his fingers back over it. "Just get home safe, sir," she said. She watched the young aide bundle him into a waiting jeep, then turned her own car back into the storm, assuming that was the end of it. She was wrong. The aide, Captain David Chen, had a very different report to file, and protocol for a retired 4-star general, especially one of McAllister's stature, involved layers of security verification after any unforeseen incident. The story she told of a calm old man in a broken-down car was logged, but so was the metadata, her license plate, her name, the time and location of the rescue. In a secure facility, that data pinged a system, and that system had a protocol. Back at her little bungalow, Maya finally thawed out. She texted her mom that she was safe, ordered pizza, and fell asleep on the couch. The storm raged through the night. At 7 the next morning, the snowplows had only just made a single pass down her street. The world was quiet, buried under 16 inches of snow. That's when she heard it, a low diesel rumble growing louder. Not one engine, many. She peered through her frosty kitchen window, and her breath caught. A line of identical black suburban SUVs with government plates was turning onto her street, carving a slow, deliberate path through the fresh powder. One, two, five, they kept coming. They moved with a silent, terrifying purpose. They weren't lost. They were arriving, and they were all parking in front of her house. The lead SUV door opened. A soldier in a crisp dress uniform stepped out, scanned the street with professional detachment, then opened the rear door. And out stepped General McAllister himself, now in a heavy overcoat, moving with a steady purpose through the snow toward her front door. This wasn't a delegation. This was the man. Maya's mind raced through 1,000 terrifying scenarios, each more absurd than the last. Had she broken some law? Was he here to silence her for seeing something she shouldn't have? She opened the door before he could knock. "Miss Maya," he said, his voice a warm gravel. "I hope we didn't startle you. May we come in? There's a matter of honor to discuss." Behind him, a few other officers emerged, carrying what looked like a long, flat case and several document boxes. Swallowing her panic, she stepped aside. Soon, her small living room was filled with the quiet presence of military personnel. The general took the offered chair, his men standing respectfully at the perimeter. "First," he began, "my apologies for the spectacle. When I called my aide yesterday, it triggered a standard post-incident security protocol. My location was flagged as compromised until a threat assessment could be completed. You became part of that assessment. The convoy," he gestured vaguely toward the window, "is both my secure transport and the assessment team. They've determined you are, in fact, just a very good Samaritan." A slight smile touched his eyes. "But protocol is only the excuse. I am here for the reason. You refused payment. In my world, a debt unpaid is a weight on the soul, so we pay our debts." He nodded to an officer who opened the long case. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a beautiful saber with an intricate brass hilt. "This was presented to me upon my retirement from the 82nd Airborne, a token of service." Before Maya could protest, he raised a hand. "I am not giving you my saber. I am showing you that some things have meaning beyond their price. What you did had meaning. You saw a person, not a problem. In a world that teaches people to look away, you turn back. That is a rare currency." He then pointed to the document boxes. "Which brings me to the practicalities. My staff has a file on you." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "A public one," he added quickly. "Your professional portfolio, your graphic design work for local nonprofits, the pro bono logo you did for the community garden. We see a pattern of character. Therefore, the debt will be paid in a currency that matches yours, opportunity." He handed her a simple folder. Inside was a contract. It was an offer for a graphic design project, but the client name made her dizzy, the McAllister Foundation. The budget line was more than she made in a year. "The foundation needs a complete rebrand," he said. "New visual identity, website, the works. We want you to pitch for it, properly, competitively. This," he said, tapping the contract, "is your invitation to the table, nothing more. The work will be hard. The standards will be extreme, but the door is open." Maya was speechless. This wasn't a reward. It was a challenge wrapped in an opportunity. It was a test. The general stood. "My number is on the last page. My foundation director will contact you this afternoon to schedule the briefing. The choice to walk through that door is yours." With that, he and his team departed as efficiently as they arrived, leaving Maya alone in the sudden quiet, the contract feeling heavy in her hands. She called her best friend, then her mother. Both reactions were a mix of shock and frantic excitement. It felt unreal. That afternoon, as promised, a stern but polite woman named Helen Ross, director of the McAllister Foundation, called. The briefing was set for Friday. The foundation, Maya learned through a frantic night of research, was a massive force in veteran reintegration and disaster relief, with an annual budget in the tens of millions. This project was a cornerstone of its new public outreach campaign. Friday arrived. The foundation headquarters was in a sleek downtown office tower. The briefing room held 6 other design firms, all established, all with portfolios filled with Fortune 500 companies. Maya, with her modest freelance portfolio, felt utterly out of her depth. Helen Ross laid out the project's brutal timeline and lofty goals: to humanize the military's humanitarian work, to appeal to younger donors, to create a brand that was authoritative yet approachable. As the other firms asked questions about analytics and scalability, Maya's mind kept returning to the general's words. You saw a person, not a problem. When her turn came, she didn't ask about metrics. She asked, what's the one story the foundation has that never gets told because it's too small? Helen Ross paused, studied her, and said, the general still writes personal checks every month to the families of soldiers under his command who were killed to cover little things, school trips, car repairs. He says the big benefits handle the monuments, he handles the groceries. The room was silent. Maya simply nodded. That's the brand, she said quietly. She worked for 72 hours straight. She didn't design a logo first, she wrote a manifesto. Strength in service, compassion in action. Her pitch centered on that story, the personal check, the groceries, using subtle human photography instead of stock hero shots, a color palette inspired by dawn after a storm, and a typography that blended structured military stencils with clean, modern curves. She presented it alone to Helen and a panel of stoic advisors. A week later, the call came. She had won the project. The news sent a shockwave through her small professional circle, but it also sent a ripple into a much larger and much darker pond. The defense contracting world is a small, incestuous ecosystem. Major branding contracts for prestigious foundations are noticed, and a nobody freelancer beating out established firms that were subsidiaries of major contractors. That raised eyebrows and questions. The first hint of trouble was an email from a firm called Titan Dynamics, one of the competitors she'd beaten. It was a politely worded request for clarification on the selection process, citing concerns about procedural transparency, given the unusual circumstances of the winner's prior contact with the foundation's chairman. It was a warning shot, disguised as bureaucracy. Then came the online comments. On the business articles celebrating her Cinderella story, anonymous users began to post. Looks like knowing how to change a tire has new career benefits. What did she really do on that snowy highway? The insinuations were ugly, slithering into the discourse. Someone on a veterans forum, claiming to be a former staffer, wrote a long, rambling post about how the general was getting soft in his old age and was easily manipulated by a pretty face. Maya tried to ignore it, pouring herself into the work. The project was exhilarating. She had access, resources, and a mission she believed in, but the pressure was immense. Every design choice was scrutinized. Every meeting with the foundation's board felt like a trial. The general remained a distant figure, approving major stages but otherwise letting Helen Ross run the process. The shadow, however, was growing. A journalist from a prominent news site contacted her, not for a feel-good story, but for a comment on allegations of cronyism in the contract award. He cited industry sources who questioned the fairness of the process. Maya, advised by Helen, gave a bland no comment. The article that followed was a masterpiece of innuendo headlined, "Stormy Rescue Leads to Sunny Contract, Coincidence or Connection?" It presented both sides, but the damage was done. The viral kindness story was being mutated into a scandal. Helen Ross called her into the foundation's offices. The older woman's face was grim. "We've been served," she said, sliding a legal document across the desk. It was a formal complaint filed with the Government Contracts Oversight Board, a little-known but powerful watchdog. Titan Dynamics, the defense contractor, was alleging that the McAllister Foundation, by awarding a contract without a fully objective process, had violated the spirit of federal contracting guidelines it loosely fell under for some of its grant work. The complaint demanded the contract be voided and rebid. "It's a nuisance suit," Helen said, "but a dangerous one. It creates a cloud. It gives the media a hook. They're not really after the contract, they're after the general's reputation, and by extension, yours." She looked at Maya squarely. "They want to prove that his judgment is compromised, that this entire project is tainted. They are going to dig into your life, Maya, into every client, every relationship, every misstep. They will try to find something to make you, and therefore the general's decision, look corrupt." Maya felt the walls of the beautiful office closing in. The opportunity had just become a battlefield. She was no longer just a designer. She was a piece in a high-stakes game of reputation and power. The general had opened a door for her, but he'd also, unwittingly, led her into the crosshairs of forces she never knew existed. And the first volley had just been fired. The legal document was a declaration of war, and the battlefield was Maya's entire life. Helen Ross arranged for a foundation lawyer, a sharp woman named Angela Cole, to represent her. Angela's first advice was brutal. Assume every email, every text, every social media post you've ever made will be subpoenaed. They're not looking for a crime, they're looking for a pattern of unprofessionalism, of entitlement, anything to suggest you expected a reward for your kindness. Maya felt sick. She had nothing to hide, but the idea of strangers combing through her private conversations, her old jokes, her moments of frustration, was a profound violation. The foundation publicly stood by the contract award, issuing a statement that the process had been rigorous and merits-based. But the media narrative had shifted. The feel-good story was now a controversy. News segments asked, when does gratitude cross the line into favoritism? Then the first personal attack landed. An anonymous blog registered that very week published a series of Maya's old social media posts from her college years. Out-of-context comments about being broke, sarcastic jokes about marrying rich, a frustrated post about a client who didn't pay. The blog's headline, "The Real Maya, a Pattern of Opportunism." It was a hatchet job, but it was effective. The comments on her professional profiles turned toxic. Through it all, she tried to work. The foundation's new brand was taking shape, and it was good, warm, strong, authentic. But every design approval meeting now had an unspoken shadow in the room. The pressure was fracturing her creativity. She stopped sleeping. She saw the Titan Dynamics logo on the side of a building, and her heart would race. Helen Ross called her in again 2 weeks later. The general, she said, had requested a meeting, not at the foundation, at his home. This was unprecedented. Captain Chen picked her up in a single, unmarked SUV. They drove out of the city to a modest, secluded house overlooking a frozen lake. The general greeted her at the door, wearing a sweater, looking more like a grandfather than a commander. He led her to a study lined with books and maps. "They're using you to get to me," he said without preamble. "Titan Dynamics lost a major bid to one of my foundation's partner charities last year. We advocated for a smaller, more efficient firm. They see this as weakness, an opening. If they can paint me as sentimental, corruptible, they discredit my advocacy. Your work, your talent is collateral damage." He poured 2 glasses of water. "I can make this go away, Maya. I can call a few people. The complaint will vanish. The stories will stop." Maya felt a surge of relief, quickly followed by a cold clarity. "What would that cost?" she asked. He nodded as if he'd expected the question. "A quiet concession elsewhere, perhaps overlooking a future bid, a small piece of integrity, the kind of transaction I have spent a lifetime refusing to make." He looked out at the lake. "I brought you here to offer you that choice, to let you off the hook. This is my fight, not yours." She thought about running, taking the escape hatch, returning to her quiet, invisible life. But she also thought of the design, the manifesto, the story of the personal checks. She thought of being manipulated into a pawn that cost the general a piece of his principles. "No," she heard herself say. "They don't get to win. We finish the project. We follow the process. Publicly." A faint, proud smile touched his lips. "Then we fight," he said, "but we fight smart. Angela Cole will handle the legal front. You will do something harder. You will be impeccable. You will deliver work so good, so undeniably professional, that it becomes its own defense. And we will shine the brightest possible light on the process." A new phase began. The general's team escalated in a different way. They didn't fight the oversight board's inquiry, they embraced it. They invited a third-party audit of the entire design selection process. They publicly released Maya's winning pitch deck, redacting only the proprietary financials. The story began to pivot again, from scandal to transparency test. But Titan Dynamics was just getting started. A week after the meeting at the lake, Angela Cole called Maya, her voice tight. "They've filed a supplemental complaint. They've found your father." Maya's blood ran cold. Her father had left when she was a child. He had a string of minor legal troubles, mostly related to debt. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. They're alleging a failure to disclose relevant family associations with financial malfeasance as part of the contractor vetting process. It's a stretch, but it's another brick in the wall of doubt they're building. This was the wait it gets worse moment. The attack was no longer just on her character. It was using the ghosts of her past, a past she had no control over, to stain the present. The media, smelling blood, ran with it. "Foundation designer's father has checkered past," the headlines read. The insinuation was clear, like father, like daughter. Maya broke down. The stress, the violation, the resurrected childhood shame, it was too much. She wanted to quit, to disappear. That night, as she sat in her dark living room, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Check your professional email from a friend." Cautiously, she opened her laptop. There in her inbox was a message from a generic account. Attached was a single PDF. It was an internal Titan Dynamics memo, dated 6 months prior. The subject line, "Mitigating the McAllister Influence." Her heart hammered as she read. The memo detailed a strategy to neutralize General McAllister's opposition to our bid pipeline by exploiting perceived vulnerabilities in his public engagements and applying pressure through ancillary channels. Her contract was listed under Ancillary Channel Pressure Points. The memo's author was a senior vice president at Titan Dynamics. This was the smoking gun. This wasn't about her or a contract. This was a corporate hit job on a respected public figure, and she was the convenient lever. The whistleblower had given her the weapon. But who was it? And why? She forwarded it immediately to Angela Cole and Helen Ross. The response was swift and seismic. Angela Cole filed the memo with the Oversight Board and the Department of Justice, alleging witness intimidation and malicious interference. Helen Ross held a press conference, her voice shaking with fury, laying out the entire cynical campaign. The general, in a rare public statement, said, "They thought kindness was a weakness to be exploited. They were wrong." The story exploded, but it flipped completely. Titan Dynamics was now on the front page, accused of a dirty tricks campaign against a war hero and a young civilian. News outlets that had been subtly maligning Maya now scrambled to paint her as the victim of a giant corporation. The public sympathy swung back, harder and more powerful than before. But in the eye of this hurricane, Maya received a second message from the unknown number. "They know it came from inside. Be careful, they play for keeps." The victory felt suddenly fragile. Titan Dynamics, backed into a corner, would be at its most dangerous. The legal battle was now a secondary theater. The real question was, what would a wounded billion-dollar defense contractor do next? The fight had just escalated to a level she could barely comprehend, and the rules were about to change. The whistleblower's warning was a tripwire. The battle moved from the court of public opinion back into the shadows, where Titan Dynamics operated best. But they had miscalculated. The leaked memo wasn't just a scandal, it was evidence. And it had landed on the desk of someone with the authority and the will to use it. Senator Elizabeth Vance, head of the Armed Services Committee and a longtime critic of defense contractor overreach. Senator Vance's office launched an inquiry citing grave concerns about corporate interference with philanthropic institutions and the intimidation of private citizens. Subpoenas were issued. The story was no longer about a contract. It was about systemic corruption. Titan Dynamics found itself under a microscope. Its other contracts, its lobbying practices, its billing procedures, all suddenly subject to scrutiny they couldn't afford. Under this pressure, the company folded. They withdrew their complaint with the Oversight Board entirely, citing a desire to avoid further distraction. They issued a terse, non-apology statement about regrettable overzealousness by junior staff. The senior vice president named in the memo resigned to pursue other opportunities. It was a rout. The legal cloud over Maya and the foundation evaporated overnight. With the obstruction cleared, Maya did exactly what the general advised. She became impeccable. She delivered the complete brand identity for the McAllister Foundation 2 days ahead of schedule. The launch was a quiet, dignified affair, focused entirely on the foundation's work. The new logo, an elegant upward curve that suggested both a helping hand and the horizon, was unveiled. The website told stories of veterans starting small businesses, of communities rebuilding after disasters, of the quiet, personal checks that kept families afloat. There was no mention of the controversy. The work spoke for itself, and it spoke volumes. A month after the launch, Maya received another invitation to the general's home by the lake. Spring was thawing the ice. He greeted her on the porch. "Come for a walk," he said. They walked in silence for a while along the water's edge. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you a second apology. I opened a door for you, but I failed to guard the threshold. You were forced to fight a battle you never enlisted for. For that, I am sorry." Maya shook her head. "You gave me a choice. You didn't make me fight. I chose to, and I'd choose it again." He stopped walking, looking at her with an expression of deep respect. "Then let me give you a proper thank you." He handed her a small, sealed envelope. "Not from me, from the foundation. Open it later." That evening, alone at home, she opened it. It was a letter from the foundation's board, signed by every member. It announced the creation of a permanent annual fellowship in her name, the Maya Reed Fellowship for Ethical Design. It would fund one young designer from an underrepresented background each year to work on projects for social good, with a full stipend and mentorship. Her work and her story would become a pipeline for others. The personal rewards followed. Her professional reputation, forged in fire, was now titanium. Offers poured in, not just for design work but for speaking engagements on ethics in business. She became a consultant to other nonprofits, helping them build transparent, merit-based processes. The general's debt, paid in opportunity, had compounded into a legacy. But one mystery remained: the identity of the whistleblower. That answer came on a rainy Tuesday in the form of a man waiting outside her studio. He was in his late 40s, wearing a trench coat, looking uneasy. "Miss Reed, my name is Andrew Pierce. I was the director of strategic communications at Titan Dynamics. I was the one who sent you the memo." He bought her a coffee and told his story. He'd been at the company for 12 years. He'd written those kinds of pressure point memos before, always justifying it as hardball business. But when he saw the strategy session about targeting the old man's soft heart and the girl, something broke. His own daughter was Maya's age. The cynicism of it finally sickened him. He'd leaked the memo, then resigned. He was now blacklisted from the industry, but he said he slept better. Maya asked him why he came forward to her now. He smiled weakly. "I saw the fellowship announcement. I wanted you to know that the good you're doing, it's real. It's a direct result. Sometimes the bad guys lose, and sometimes the people in the middle get to choose a side." He wished her well and left, a man rebuilding his life from scratch, his conscience finally clear. The final act of the saga played out in a Washington, D.C. hearing room. Senator Vance's investigation culminated in a series of reforms, dubbed the McAllister Amendments, attached to the next Defense Appropriations Bill. They mandated stricter firewalls between corporate lobbying and philanthropic grant-making, and created protections for individuals targeted by reputational warfare campaigns from contractors. The general testified, not with anger, but with a powerful, weary clarity about the importance of separating the mission of service from the machinery of profit. On a bright May morning, a year after the blizzard, Maya stood at a podium at the Foundation's annual gala. She was there to present the first fellowship to a brilliant young designer from Detroit named Carlos. As she spoke about the power of design with integrity, her eyes met the general's from across the ballroom. He gave a slight, firm nod. The debt was paid. Not with a saber or a contract, but with something far more valuable: a restored faith in the idea that no act of good conscience is ever too small, and that sometimes the system can be made to work for the good guys. She left the gala early, walking the city streets. She passed the building that housed Titan Dynamics offices. Their stock price had fallen. Their CEO had been replaced. They were a diminished force. She felt no vengeance, only a quiet certainty. She had helped a stranger in a storm. That simple choice had echoed through courtrooms, boardrooms, and the halls of Congress, proving that in the end, integrity is not a weakness to be exploited, but the strongest foundation you can build upon. The convoy that arrived at her door had brought not just a challenge, but a revelation, her own strength, and that was the greatest reward of all. So what is the true currency of a good deed? Maya's story began with a single, freezing moment on a highway, a decision to see a person, not a problem. It ended with reformed laws, a named fellowship, and a corporation held to account. But the real victory wasn't in the Senate or the boardroom. It was in the proof that our smallest choices have weight in a world that often feels too heavy to move. General McAllister offered payment, then opportunity, then protection. But what he ultimately gave Maya and what she gave back was something more profound: agency, the chance to stand in her own integrity and defend it. The Titan dynamics of the world operate on a simple calculus: that people are predictable, that kindness is a liability, that systems are too rigid to bend toward justice. This story is a counterargument. It's a map of how one act of pure intention can travel through the veins of power and alter its heartbeat. The fellowship that bears Maya's name now ensures that her moment on that highway isn't an end, but a beginning for others. The General's Foundation, with its new brand built on transparency, operates as a testament to the idea that institutions can reflect our best selves, not our worst instincts. And the whistleblower, Andrew Pierce, reminds us that redemption is always possible, that conscience can resign from a corrupted system and choose a side. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and terrifying. It demanded courage Maya didn't know she had. It asked a war hero to confront a different kind of enemy, one in a suit, armed with lawyers and lies. But that's what makes it real. The blizzard was an act of nature. Everything that followed was an act of human will. We are left then with a question not about them, but about us. What do we do when we see someone stranded, either on a roadside or by a system? Do we drive past, telling ourselves it's not our problem, that the risk is too great? Or do we turn back, not knowing what chain of events we are setting in motion, but trusting that some debts are worth incurring and some battles are worth fighting? Maya turned back, and in doing so, she didn't just save a man from the cold. She helped save an ideal from the cold calculus of power. She proved that gratitude, when rooted in genuine respect, isn't a weakness. It's the one force that can't be hacked, outsourced, or commodified. It remains eternally human. If you found strength in this story, leave a like to support this channel. And subscribe, because we find and tell these stories every day, stories of ordinary people who chose to turn back, and in doing so, changed everything. Your next revelation is waiting. Have a wonderful day.